in the descriptions, I've kept it as a Tim Heale podcast, series 3, episode, person's name. The rest of the descriptions about their bio, but the title I've changed, and I've also started doing dedicated thumbnails using Canva just to try and making the episodes more attractive.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam Adams. And today we've got Tim Heale on the podcast. He has the Tim Heale podcast. Something that we're going to be talking about. One of them is kind of like he's changing his intro. He's changing over a couple of other things. And in all of this, there's something else that happened, and he's got a big recommendation for you. And we're going to be talking about it and why it's so important and what he's been going through and how you can avoid it. So let's jump right in. His bio is in the show notes already, so you can just scroll down, grab that bio. The links to his websites and podcast are already in the show notes. So if you're listening and you want to check out the podcast, it's pretty easy because that little link is already in our show notes. So just scroll down. You can click directly over to his podcast. It is literally called the Tim Heale Podcast. And so, Tim, I have a lot of questions for you. I'm excited to get into this big ordeal that you've been having to go through it and your advice on it, and ask you the same thing that I ask only the guests who name the podcast after themselves. Because I always think, oh, we need to name it what our avatar's looking for. And I think a lot of people are afraid to name it of themselves. So why did you do it? And what are the pros and cons in your mind of naming a podcast after yourself?
Well, the reason I named after myself to start with is because we were going into lockdown, and that's how I got into the podcast to start with. The reason I actually got into it is I was actually hadn't planned on doing it. I was doing ancestry, and I came across my great granddad, who was a chief stoker in the Royal Navy, who lived across the harbour from where I live now in Portsmouth. He died back in 1930, and I thought it'd have been brilliant if I could have had a chat with him and get his life story and one thing another. Then we went into lockdown, and this was playing on my mind, and I thought, well, if I don't tell my story, that'll be lost. So I sat down and I started a podcast, and I just named it the Tim Heale Podcast because originally it was just about me. Yeah. So I did 24 half-an-hour episodes of my life. So as any listeners out there are suffering from insomnia or something like that.
Is it like episode 1 through 24? Those are the ones?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like a Netflix marathon, a good 12 hours. I could get your whole life by just chilling there from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. one day.
Yep.
If I was...
I'm not sure you'll be able to stay awake that long, but...
Okay, there you go.
I mean, some of it's pretty raw. Some of it's pretty funny. The raw stuff is I lost my best mate and my wife within a year of each other. And those episodes are really, really difficult to do. And I had to do several takes and a bit of editing to take out some of the tears. But there's some real funny stuff in there. There's some stuff that I've done on the operational tours, which was quite scary.
One funny thing? I got some questions for you, and it's really going to help a podcaster today. But like you mentioned the sad story, and you mentioned you got all this stuff. Can you highlight one of the funny things that's kind of in there, just like a story from your past that's pretty humorous?
Right. So when I was a lad, there was a little group of us. Have you heard about the CND marches?
I have
anti-missile brigade. I mean, he used to demonstrate all over the place. And I think it must have been one Saturday morning in the town centre where I lived. They've got this CND protest going on, and it's all about stop the nuclear bombs and all the rest of it. And me and a few of my mates, we had these little cap rockets. So you put a cap in it and you throw it, and it makes a big bang. And we had cap guns and things like that. So the local press picked up on us throwing these rockets into this demonstration crowd that were demonstrating against the rockets and the nuclear weapons. And we made the front page of the local newspaper. That was really, really funny at the time. Got us in a lot of trouble,
Cool.
mind.
I think I cut you off a minute ago, and maybe we can get back there. So I apologize. But what happened after 24 episodes? Like at the end of 24 episodes, did you just say, I'm bored, it's still locked down, that was only 12 hours of content, I'm going to interview other people? Or like, don't you have like well over 100 episodes published already?
Yeah. I got to the end of that and we're still in lockdown. So I did a couple more episodes of some in-depth stuff. I did 2 trips across to Colditz Castle in Lower Saxony. And Colditz Castle, anybody does know, was a prisoner of war camp during the Second World War. And that's where they put all the prolific escapers, thinking that it was escape-proof. It clearly wasn't, because it was quite a few home runs. And I also did another episode where I did a job for a mate. I did 6 trips down to Morocco, from London to Morocco with a truck, taking down materials and bringing back hanging garments. So I told the story about those trips, and on one of them, my best mate came on, and I had 5 of the trips were like clockwork, back and down in 12 days. And then my wife at the time, she booked some time off and came down with me, and she's never ever flown. But we got held up tipping. We didn't get a reload, and we had to sit there for an extra few days, which meant that she couldn't get back, having to fly back out of Gibraltar. So I told that story.
Let me go into, there's so many questions. And I want to make sure to stay on the question specific, because I get lost if not. So first and foremost, you already mentioned why you launched it. You launched the podcast because your grandpa passed away, and you felt like he should have been able to tell his story and have it out there. So you decided to start a podcast named after yourself because it was about yourself. What are the pros and the cons of having a podcast with your name? Pros and cons. Just give me like, this is a good thing and this is a bad thing. Maybe 1 or 2 things if you can.
The pro is that there's no ambiguity of what it is. It's about me. The downside is, although I am famous, not many people know that I'm that famous. So for the channel to grow, my name doesn't work particularly well. I'm not a Joe Rogan or a Tim Ferriss. But recently, I've started renamed most of the later episodes using a particular tool to give what I call it analytics that says the percentage of the hits that it's likely to get. The Tim Heale podcast doesn't score very high at all, but using something about the person that I've been interviewing does. So I've done that. And I've also, in the descriptions box, I've kept it as a Tim Heale podcast, series 3, episode, whatever number it is, and the person's name. And then the rest of the descriptions about them, bio and stuff like that. But the title I've changed. And I've also started doing now dedicated thumbnails using Canva, just to try and look at making the episodes more attractive, because all I was doing before was just putting up my particular little logo.
Canva, I think it's just canva.com. So a thumbnail is generally a piece of artwork that is a digital artwork that can be used, like, for example, on a YouTube. It's the image that you see when you're scrolling through YouTube. So they actually pick what image that is. Sometimes you can create something that has words on it. Sometimes it's just a picture, but Canva is really good for that. And then the next thing, Tim, that you're talking about is many new podcasters. Most people that I know, they don't understand right off in the beginning that you can use a different image or a different thumbnail for each and every episode. So example, if you have 120 episodes, you could still have your podcast artwork, but you could also have 120 episode artworks, these little thumbnails. And so what most people do is they just either upload their main artwork or they let it default to their main logo, their main podcast artwork. And what you're saying is at some point, Tim, you found that out and then you decided to go ahead and start creating on their own. How long did that take? How many episodes in?
I've only recently, the last couple of months, learned that particular nugget of information. You need a really good title and you need a really good thumbnail, because there's close on 3 million podcasts out there. And to be able to get that click to people want to listen to your episode or watch your episode, then you've got to do something to capture that particular audience.
I'm glad you brought that up. So we had a question that I was asking you earlier. I was saying, what made you change it to interviewing people? I was asking if you're bored, and you went through a story about like what had happened prior to it. Do you think you could just share with us specifically, maybe give us a 10-second answer? Like, what made you decide that you're going to interview people?
Well, because I got to the end of telling my story, I thought, we're still in lockdown. What do I do now? Why don't I start doing other people's? Okay. For them to leave a legacy for future generations. And that's how I got into doing other people.
Why didn't you change the podcast title because you remember you said, I made the title Tim Heale because it was about me. How come you didn't change the title when you started interviewing people?
I didn't know any better at the time.
What are you, because I know that you've mentioned something about when you and I were talking before, you said something like it might be listed as Ordinary People, Extraordinary Stories. Yeah. I think I'm saying that right. Just doing it off memory. But yeah, I think you said something like that. And it made me wonder if you're going to change the podcast title, or am I on the off base?
I've expanded the title slightly to the Tim Heale podcast, Ordinary People's Extraordinary Stories. Okay. So hopefully that'll start growing. Yeah, that'll start growing the channel a little bit more, because to be honest, I mean, I checked on Listen Notes the other day. I'm in the top 5% of podcasters, and I've got, I think it's about 42 downloads an episode average. Some have had, 300 or 400 downloads, some sort of about 20, 25. Yeah. But the average is around about 42. So that's how they worked it out, I think, on Listen Notes. So how they come to that, I don't know. But again, the drama I had where I switched platforms about slightly. Get into that? Yeah, we'll get into that. I think the listener definitely wants to hear a little bit about that. So we mentioned it in the beginning that Tim Heale has kind of gone through something lately, and it hasn't been completely pleasant. I'll just say that. And he has a little bit of advice for you just to make sure that you don't go through it. And it's something that we've done, and it was quite hard. I feel really lucky that the person on my team who took care of it, she's not like me, and she doesn't have anything else going on. I have a lot going on, and so I would have never been able to do what you did, Tim, on my own. With her, she's always looking up everything and connecting with everybody, and she was getting paid to do it. So it was a little bit easier. I didn't have as much issues, but why don't you share kind of that whole story, what's been happening and how to avoid the problems? Right. How it came about is I was at a podcast show in London, and I was talking to the guy on Anchor. The head of Anchor was there. I was having a chat with him. I started off on Anchor originally, and what I used to do is record it in audio, edit the audio in Adobe Audition, and upload the audio files in MP3 or WAV file. Then I went over to Buzzsprout, and I found Buzzsprout a much better platform. It's a little bit easier to use. It gives a bit more feedback and stuff like that. So I went across to Buzzsprout, and everything was going on Buzzsprout. And then what I would do is occasionally I'd put a dump on to Anchor, because I changed all my platforms over to Buzzsprout. He suggested that I could, because now I record everything on StreamYard, and I can upload the MP4 files, which is the video files, onto Anchor, and they'll strip out for the audio platforms and put the video up on Spotify. So I changed across because I didn't think I could put MP4 files onto Buzzsprout. By the time I found out I could, it was too late. Done a bit of a switch. And then because I find Anchor a little bit difficult to navigate and stuff like that, and it wasn't giving them much feedback, I decided to go back to Buzzsprout, and that's where the problem started, because trying to switch back on platforms and get the right links from Buzzsprout to all the different platforms was something of a nightmare. I'm still working away for it. There's one or two platforms that still haven't come back across. But in the meantime, what I've done is I've deleted my Anchor account. Hopefully that'll put us back on the right track.
You started with Anchor.
I started with Anchor.
Buzzsprout, and then you moved from Buzzsprout back to Anchor?
Yeah, briefly.
Okay. And the big problems that you ran into, when I look up your podcast on my phone right now, I see 4 different Tim Heale podcasts.
Yeah.
That's because like some of them are still on one of the other platforms that you're kind of trying to shut down. Okay. And how many total do you want on there? So if I see 4, am I supposed to see 2 or 1?
Well, hopefully it'll just be the one podcast that's got all 212 episodes on there.
Yeah. Anchor to Buzzsprout. And then you didn't know Buzzsprout could do video. So you wanted to switch to something that could do video, and you decided to go back to Anchor. Why did you go away from Anchor in the first place? Like, what was it that made you, I think you might have shared this with somebody that you talked at a conference or something like that.
Yeah.
And they might have just like gave you advice, but what was the bad part of Anchor? Why did you want to switch?
For me, Anchor is a little bit clunky to work your way around. It's not as intuitive. It's not as easy. I didn't find it as easy to use as I do with Buzzsprout, or because I do everything in video, it goes up onto YouTube and Buzzsprout, and they strip out the audio files. I don't have to do a double edit. I don't have to edit audio and video. I can just edit the video, and that goes up and that gets stripped out. That's given me a bit more time.
Okay. So for the listener, I don't normally recommend very many platforms. We do recommend Libsyn and Buzzsprout. We like them so much we became affiliates. With a hosting platform like Buzzsprout or Anchor or Libsyn or Podetize, and there's so many more, there's probably hundreds. I'm guessing there's probably technically hundreds. There's dozens of bigger names that you probably will hear. But Buzzsprout and Libsyn are fantastic. And I like the UX, the user experience. The way they make it they make it fairly easy, and they have a lot of data for you too. Now, Anchor, we don't usually recommend. And one of the things that I always say is it's because it's a free platform and you get what you pay for. And I think, Tim, what you mentioned is going to be almost supportive to that idea. Whereas if you're on a really tight budget and Anchor, you can get it for free. That's fine. But you do get what you pay for. So if you have the ability to pay around $20 or $30 a month, some of these other platforms can be really helpful. And what Tim was saying, the user experience, how it was as a user going through, it was not as intuitive. And I think of it like this, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, some of these others, because they're charging $20 or $30 a month for, let's call it hundreds of thousands of clients. They have the ability to be able to invest in their own platform with engineers and UX designers and stuff like that. Whereas they're making the platform as simple, easy, intuitive, because they have the finances to be able to put into it. Anchor, because they're free and they're performing a service, really it's costing them money. And so they don't have the resources to be able to put into grow the way that some of the other platforms that are paid are. So very interesting. All right. So Anchor, you stopped because it wasn't so intuitive. You went to Buzzsprout. So if you knew that Buzzsprout could do the video, you would have just stayed with them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Random question, why would you switch from Buzzsprout back to Anchor if Anchor was not as intuitive? And why wouldn't you go to, I don't know, all the other platforms like Libsyn or somewhere? Is it because the only one that you knew of that could do video was Anchor? Is that part of it?
Yeah.
And you were I don't want to do the research and find another one.
Because I'm doing everything in video, it meant that what I was doing was double the work. So I was having to edit the video and then take the audio over and edit the audio as well.
Okay.
And that takes a huge amount of time, especially at the time I was doing 4 or 5 recordings on a Monday and 4 or 5 on a Tuesday. And then it takes up the rest of the week to keep up with doing the edits.
Yeah.
Because you double the amount of work. It was only that they said that they could take the MP4, and I hadn't realised that Buzzsprout could take MP4.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I did realise, when I found out, that's when I switched back. It was a matter of a few days.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody and said, well, I just put MP4s up onto Buzzsprout. Yeah, they take them to, oh no.
Yeah.
So, and that's when the drama unfolded that I was trying to bring it all back across. Don't do it, people. Stick with what you know.
Tim, I've got a few other questions that I know a podcaster would want to ask. So I'm going to take a break so we can go into our commercial. And then you and I will jump in and do like a little bit of a rapid fire round, and I'll ask you 2 or 3 more questions. All right, don't go away, guys. We'll be right back.
Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, GrowYourShow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show.
We're back with Tim Heale, and we've learned a lot from just his experience in going back and forth between different podcast platforms and having 4 different podcasts published. And some of them have like no ratings, no reviews. They're just a whole bunch of podcasts. And we're talking about how he is moving that back down to 1. He's going back to Anchor, even though it was a little less intuitive. I've got a bit of a rapid fire round, just a few questions that I know a podcaster would want to know. So, Tim, one thing that is interesting is there's a lot of podcasters that choose to start a podcast and they want to monetize it. Like, for example, they want it to add to their business, or they want to have sponsors. So for you, I want to ask, does your podcast, the Tim Heale podcast, where you get other people's stories, is it something that you're monetizing? And if so, how?
For me, I'm not in it for money. I've retired from the British Army. I have my pension, so I'm just about scraped by on my pension. I spend, I don't know, $200-300 a month on the different platforms I'm using. The Adobe, I'm on Buzzsprout, I'm on StreamYard, and these are paid platforms that I'm using, along with YouTube, obviously. I'm not really interested in making money because I'm happy to live with what I'm on. If it grows enough to bring in a bit more money, yeah, fine, I'm happy with that. But for me, the ultimate goal is that my podcasts are to leave as a legacy for future generations to look back at this time in history to know what we did now.
Yeah.
And that's the driving force that keeps me going. And I've interviewed some fascinating people for the podcast. And there's just, when I'm up to 128 other people that I've done. And I've got podcasts going out 2 a week until October, the end of October at the moment. And it's not diminishing.
Nice. So I wanted to find out, like, in your opinion, then, who do you serve on your podcast and how do you serve them? Are you serving the listener? Are you serving the future? Or are you serving like maybe the families of these people that are getting interviewed? Like, when you think of what you're doing for somebody or the world, who is that you're mainly serving?
That's a good question. Well presented. I'm doing it for future generations. I'm interested in history, and I think it's fascinating to be able to look back at history and look at ordinary people. I mean, you can look back at history and you can find about famous people, but to look back in history and try and find something about your own relatives, for instance, the information is not readily available. It's not out there. That's what I'm trying to do is to leave a legacy for future generations to be able to look back.
Yeah.
The fact that I'm recording the stuff now and hopefully people pick up on and watch and listen to my podcast is brilliant. And if it gets monetized, fine. But I'm not going to push that because that's not the driving force that I'm looking at achieving.
And my last question for you, on your podcast, you have a lot of guests. You're at episode 200 and we'll just say coming up to 220 as we record. And you only had, 20 or 30 podcasts that were about you in the very first 24. So you've had like nearly 200 more people on your podcast. You probably interviewed like nearly 200 people. I know that a lot of people that are getting into podcasting, they are afraid of being able to get good guests. They'll kind of say like, no guest would want to be on my show. Who am I? How would I ever get a guest? What if they say no? And so, Tim, you've obviously like been crushing this. You've got 200-ish interviews. So share with the listener, how did you figure out how to get 200 people to say yes to your show?
Well, originally I was just cajoling and badgering and pestering the life out of people to come and tell their story. That kind of dried up towards the back end of last year. And then I went into a kind of series 4 where I used to be on Facebook on a Thursday evening having a bit of a rant. So I put my rants onto podcasts. And if anybody wants a bit of a giggle, have a listen to the series 4 because it's just me going on having a rant about present day malarkey that's been happening. And in the beginning of this year, Buzzsprout put something on their page which said, looking for guests. So I put a little post on there asking for anybody who wants to come on my podcast.
Okay.
I got a flea in the ear from the Buzzsprout community and said, you need to go and check out Podmatch. So I checked out Podmatch, signed up to Podmatch, and I haven't looked back since.
Cool.
I have now completed on Podmatch 105 interviews. I've got another 9, I think, scheduled, and I've got three waiting to schedule.
Don't you get paid by Podmatch? Alex Sanfilippo's the owner. He's become a friend of mine. Don't you get paid like $40 or something? I don't remember the number, but
it depends on the plan you're on. I'm on a professional plan. I pay, I think it's about $40 a month. And then other people that are on the paid plans, then you get a little bit of a kickback from it. It ranges from a couple of dollars to sort of $15, I guess, the maximum, something like that, $10.
Okay.
So a few dollars for each. And then they at the end of the month, they'll pay you what you've earned in that month.
So for you, in 8 or 9 interviews will come out every month because some weeks have like an extra day or two.
Yeah. And then I'll also have an odd one that will come out of schedule because it will tie in with whoever I've interviewed. If they've got a book launch or something that they want to tie it in with, then I'll put it out earlier.
Okay.
So, yeah, I have 2 podcasts a week going out on a Sunday and a Wednesday as a general rule, and it'll go at 6 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time.
So, Tim, you're putting out 8 or 9 episodes each month because some months have just a couple of extra days. And so what I'm wondering about that is, as you're publishing so many of these with Podmatch, and that maybe they're paying you like 15-ish bucks a month, it sounds like you're making more money than the 30 or 40 that you're spending. Like if I multiply, let's just say 8 by 15 bucks, is pretty close to like $200. So it's like you're making money instead of spending money. Is that right? Or
not quite right. It's only the paid plans, people that are on the paid plan that you'll get a little bit of a kickback from.
So how many of those do you do? How many, like out of the 8 or 9 your episodes that you're publishing, how many can be paid per month for you usually?
It kind of varies a little bit. I mean, the first month I got paid was $110. This last month has been $148.
Okay.
It just depends on the amount of people that are on a paid plan. Most of the ones on a paid plan, they're legacy ones that you don't get paid for.
Okay.
It's only the ones on a pro plan that you'll get a kickback.
Got it. But
it's covering the costs.
Yeah, it's more than covering. And it's almost what I said. I said a couple $100 and it's $148.50 or whatever. That's pretty cool. You're making $100 I think anyone listening should jump onto Podmatch. Yes,
Oh,
you'll spend like
absolutely.
$30 or whatever, $40 a month. But if you're doing what Tim's doing, you're going to be netting $100. If you're spending 30 or 40 and you're getting 138 or whatever it was, like I've already forgotten. But yeah, like $150 ish. That's pretty good. Cool. Tim, we've already got your bio. We've already got the link to your podcast, and any other links that you got are going to be in the show notes for our listener. They can just scroll down. Let's just end here. What best advice do you have for very new podcasters, somebody who's about to launch their show?
Well, first off, I would say, yes, do it. Get into podcasting. It's fantastic. 2, don't get hooked up on numbers. So many people put out a podcast, they don't get any listeners, or they might get 1 or 2, the mum or something listens to it. Forget the numbers. Concentrate on putting out quality of audio, quality of visual, quality of content. As long as you're putting out the quality, people will come round to it. It takes time to build a channel. I think the average person that starts a podcast puts out 5 episodes and then scraps it. The key is continuity. If you're putting out an episode once a week, once a month, just keep going. Don't get hooked up on numbers or anything like that. Work out why you're doing it in the first place. For me, I do it to leave a legacy for future generations. And the more episodes that I can do, the more people will benefit in 50, 100 years' time.
Yeah.
And that's why I do it. I don't care about numbers. I don't really care about making a huge amount of money. If I end up a bit like Joe Rogan, all right. So, but
he's
it's
got
me.
A lot of listeners, doesn't he?
Yeah. Wouldn't mind a few of them, but at the end of the day,
one or two listeners. Yeah, I appreciate that. I really like the takeaway of focusing on the content. Like, I really love that. I think a lot of people can get caught up in other things and depressed and quit, because they've only done 5. Yeah. I've got a tattoo that's with symbols. It's basically saying that persistence and determination give you endless potential. It comes from a Calvin Coolidge quote, but it's just these 3 symbols. And what I've noticed is in my life, I'm usually a stick to it person. Normally don't dabble or just try something real quick and then stop. But the way that I think of it for like a podcast, Tim, like what you're saying, the way I think of it is, I think that there's a story from a book, I think is a true story that is in some book. I don't remember if it's Think and Grow Rich or what the book was. It might be Think and Grow Rich though. But they talk about 3 feet from gold. Like there was somebody who had this mine and they were digging and digging and digging. They tried, but they ended up quitting. And they sold the land to somebody else for cheap. And that other person came and they digged for 3 feet and they got all the gold and they made all this money. And I think it's a true story. At least it sounds like it's an actual true story. And it's like persistence and determination. Some people, like you said, quit after 5 episodes. Most people, don't go past 6 episodes. So it's like, for us, as we're doing this, some people are going to a new place and they're digging for 5 seconds. They're like, oh, I've dug, 10 feet down. I've dug 3 inches down. I'm sweating. I'm tired. There obviously isn't any gold here. So they go to another place and they start digging. There's obviously no gold here. They keep saying this, but like all they had to do is just be persistent and determined. And that would be really helpful. So that takeaway of focusing more on putting in the work, putting out good content, sharpening your blade, digging every day, continuity. Like you said, it's something that I think a lot of people forget about. And they're like, oh, I'm just going to try it for a minute. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to quit. And like they start digging with their podcast for a very short time, maybe 5 or 6 episodes. And then all of a sudden they're like, nope, I wasn't famous. I'm just going to quit while I'm behind. So I like that. If you're a podcaster and you are listening and you think the numbers are important, but you don't want to have to focus on them, that's something that you can do by working with Grow Your Show. That's my team. So just in case you think numbers are important, or unlike Tim, like Tim doesn't really care if he monetizes, but some of you might want to monetize. So if you're thinking, man, I need to make sure that I have enough listeners so I can put out my legacy, so I can monetize with my own business or with advertisers, whatever it is, that's one thing that my team does. So if you're on the opposite end, is you're like, numbers are important, great, feel free to reach out to us. And I will say that no matter what, you should focus on the content. You should be the star of your show, even if we're growing it. I don't think it should be you trying to put out great content and trying to do all this. It's just too many hats. So that's where we could step in. Go to Tim Heale's podcast. Maybe by the time that this episode's aired, maybe there's no longer 4 of them. But if you have to do this, and if you do see multiple on there, and one of them says the word podcast in yellow, then you're definitely going to want to skip the one where podcast is in yellow script, and instead pick one where the logo is still in yellow, but the script that says podcast is in black. So that might help you at least kind of narrow it down a bit. But check it out. If you love it, if you love hearing about ordinary people and their extraordinary stories, then leave him a rating and a review, and maybe mention that you heard about him here on this podcast. Really appreciate you being a loyal listener. And next episode, it's going to be a solo episode where I just pour into you and your business. So I'll see you there. Hey, Tim, thank you for your time and your wisdom and your experiences. And we really appreciate you being part of the show.
No, thank you very much for having me on. I've enjoyed it. And hopefully people will take a little bit of inspiration, either start a podcast or if they are in a podcast, just to keep going. It's a great thing to be able to put out content, and good quality content for people to listen to, because it's the way forward. People are not listening to the mainstream media anymore. People are turning to podcasts. They're turning to YouTube all the time. So Thank you so much, Adam, for having me on the show.
You're like a real creative, like a genuine creative. That's where you enjoy making that. That's something else I think the listener can take away today. All right, guys, we'll see you on the next episode.
You know, I really don't say this nearly enough. I don't mention this, and I feel horrible because it's a great resource for you to be able to take your podcast to the next level. And it's simply a free resource that I don't need your email or anything. It's just a podcasting course that I created that is ended up putting in the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely going to want to just check out those first 6 episodes, see how they can help you improve your podcast, get in front of more people, and have a better result where you're making more money through the podcast, etc. So much can happen after you listen through episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you haven't done it, go do it now. And by the way, if you're subscribed, you'll keep hearing more great content. So to those of you who are, I'll see you on the next episode.